Hey, how is everybody doing? This presentation is going to cover the aspects that you need to know in order to become that awesome preceptor that you may have remembered from your EMT or medic class. So we'll get started. So the objectives of this course, we want to make sure that we know how to identify multiple personalities. We want to understand how to navigate difficult students, because unfortunately they do exist. Develop communication strategies that will help you, and then how to effectively manage and motivate your adult learners. So the first thing we're going to look at is facilitating learning. And again, just as a quick intro, remember this is a presentation for Princeton Rescue Squad, the Educational Institute, to kind of help you as a brand new preceptor that's never precepted before, understand exactly what it takes to do a good job, to work with these students and be effective for what we need you to do, because you all are the backbone of our programs. We can't determine that the student is entry-level competent unless we give them the opportunity in the field, and you all are the ones that really measure that for us, so keep that in mind. So we're going to talk about facilitating learning. So we're going to facilitate learning by enticing these students. We want to excite them and we want to empower them. We all know that there are times in our career where we get tired, we get grumpy, or we may the proverbial salty is what we always say, but we want to try to put that mentality aside when we have a student, and we want to give them the ability to get engaged in their learning and entice them or interest them in all the aspects of patient care, and empower them to, give them the opportunity to feel like they're making an impact and that their education is coming to fruition. They're able to see that. So we want to become a student person instead of a people person. We want to be a student person. And we're going to identify multiple personalities. We're going to look at all the multiple personalities that are out there. So when we talk about the student, we want to understand what their locus of control is, what needs and drives that student, what strokes their fire, and then we also need to talk about behavioral issues that we will encounter. So let's kind of get these defined out there and kind of understand a little bit more about each of these topics. So with locus of control, we're not talking about the cricket. We're asking what motivates the student. Is it internal rewards or external rewards? So with someone who is an internally motivated individual, this is somebody that they take responsibility for their self. They believe life is a game of skill rather than chance. They're usually vigilant and takes control to get the job done. These are our self-starters, and these are probably our strong paramedics that are willing to get in and get the job done. Now, that doesn't mean that an externally motivated person can't be a good paramedic. You just have to know how to approach them differently, because your externally motivated person, you have to remind them why they're pursuing what they're doing. They're looking for higher wages, and it may be that they're looking for some sort of commendation. But something that you need to remember with this group is they do have a tendency to blame others, and they can't avoid responsibility for problems. So you really have to approach them in a different manner in order to get the same amount of getting the job done that you see with the internally motivated person. So with those that are internally motivated, we want to give them verbal praise. This gives them a sense of completion. It makes them feel like they've done something fabulous. It keeps them enticed, excited, and empowered. And that's really what we want to drive for. Those that are externally motivated, giving them that verbal praise is great, but do it in a public recognition kind of way. It will motivate them more to do more. So with the need, strokes, and drivers, this was something that was identified by a guy by the name of Abraham Maslow in 1954. And if we have a strong need that is not being fulfilled, we are motivated, if not driven, to satisfy that need. So I want to repeat that again. If we have a strong need that isn't being met, then we're going to work twice as hard to satisfy that need. We're going to be motivated to try to satisfy that need. So there are 5 basic needs, and it starts from the bottom of this pyramid and works its way up. So you'll see here we have basic physiologic needs, then we have safety and security. We have to have this belonging or a social needs. We have to be able to engage with our fellow colleagues out there. Then we have to gain this esteem and status, and the one that's the most difficult to reach, it's not impossible, but it's the one that's way up there, and that is self-growth. So our needs are just like a thermostat. If they're not being met, then we're going to be driven to fulfill those needs. But if you have a need that has been satisfied, you're not going to have the drive to push or do anything else. So here is the basic physiologic needs. So we're going to look at each one of these categories individually here. So basic physiologic needs, if we have this class, we get through the paramedic program, then we're going to get a better paying job, we're going to have more food, better shelter. It's going to meet those needs. That is the basic physiologic needs category. Then the next one is safety and security. So once you're in the class, we need to make sure that they feel secure in the classroom, they feel secure in clinical and in the field internship. They don't want to rock the boat. So they want to make sure that they maintain that feeling of security. Sometimes this can cause a student to stop almost in their forward momentum of being good in the field and being able to practice. We've seen those students that go, nope, can't do it, walking out, I'm backing out, I can't do this, and they stop. And it's usually because somewhere along the line they're starting to feel that their safety or security is out of balance, and they're going to back off until they figure out how to balance themselves better. These are the ones that we have to pay particular attention to, and typically we are able to identify those individuals and correct the issue before they get into the field to you guys. But you will have those individuals that maybe they had a bad experience on the field, on a call, and suddenly they're like, nah, something is not right. You know, maybe someone knocked them down or made them feel inferior. Maybe we have to kind of bolster them and bring them back up. We have to make sure that they feel secure in their ability to function. So that's really important. Now with the belongings and social needs, these guys want to fit in, especially if you've ever seen the new EMT students. They come out and they're wanting to fit in, and they will, and this happens in paramedic class too, they're going to develop the attitude of the preceptor. So that's why it's really important for you to forget that negative side that may come into your mindset, and remember you're there to empower, entice, and excite these people. And like I just mentioned, if you have that student that has really high ideals and we expose them to a preceptor that maybe doesn't excite, entice, and empower them, it can lower their own level of ideals in order for them to just feel like they fit in, so that they can be a part of that team and have that social need met. So just remember your mentality when you're on the truck with these students, that you want to maintain your best foot forward. Now on the esteem and status, there's 2 levels in this category. They've kind of broken it out here. There's one where you have a need for respect of others, and then you have need for feelings of confidence and mastery. So those are 2 different levels that can actually be seen in the esteem and status topic. The pearl of wisdom here, what you say can have a lasting impact on a student's self-esteem. I cannot stress that enough. You need to recognize and commend a job well done. Discourage anything that's inappropriate and tie the learning into maintaining the esteem and status that they've attained up to this point. So encourage them to explore potentials and evaluate their personal goals. You really are kind of the cheerleader for these individuals. You have to give them that chance to feel like they're getting that self-esteem, that confidence level raised. But again, you don't want them to be really confident and cocky and then make mistakes. So you have to be able to identify those mistakes and discourage them when they happen so that you can bring out the best in that student. And then finally, we have self-growth. And as I mentioned before, this is the hardest to achieve. And it's a recognition of self-worth and overall potential. At this point, you want to feel whole and self-sufficient. So that's kind of how these different categories and topics go. You're going from this basic physiologic need. Once those are met, we're cool with that. We can move on to safety and security. If we feel safe and secure in our environment, then we want to make sure that we've got that social need taken care of. And then we're going to build our confidence, and we're going to develop this self-esteem and this status, because we are learning, we are becoming the professional student, and we want to engage and get involved in patient care activities. And we know that in order to do that, we have to do a good job. So it's a constant build of this pyramid to try to gain each of these levels. So when you're dealing with students, remember, the basic physiologic needs are important. Get them safe and secure, make them feel like they're a part of your team, and then start building that confidence level. Now we're going to look at strokes. And strokes are not strokes like we see the central nervous system type. What we're talking about here is the things that encourage self-esteem and growth. So with strokes, when we're children, when we cry, mom would respond to us, and they usually will love us and hug us and keep us warm. And that's how we gained confidence, because if we cried, we knew that someone was there to protect and take care of us. That was through physical touch. But as we get older and as adults, that morphs and changes into verbal cues. So a very good and simple example of a verbal cue that engages someone is literally just saying hi. So there are 4 types of strokes we're going to look at. The first one is the positive unconditional stroke. You're a great person. There's nothing behind that. There's no ulterior motive. It's not conditional upon something. It is just a positive, unconditional stroke. It is, you are a great person. Positive conditional, you did a great job splinting that leg. So now we have a positive response. You know, you did a great job, but there is a condition behind it because we're requiring them to splint the leg appropriately. Now you can give a negative unconditional, and that just means that there's no conditions. They just automatically think you must be a complete and total moron. Of course, we want to avoid that at all costs, so do not do that. As a preceptor, we can find ways to negotiate and navigate through these student encounters without having to be that mean. Now there is the negative conditional, and I have a pretty exaggerated one here, but you shouldn't have stuck the needle in that patient's eye. But when we're talking about negative conditional, you did a great job splinting that leg, but you also forgot to notice that the patient was hypoxic and was turning blue, and you needed to address the airway first. So that would be a good negative conditional, where there is a negative. You're pointing out the negative, and it is conditional. Now, students are looking to you as a mentor, and your verbal cues are going to mean more because you are that mentor. So you need to remember to recognize and commend a job well done, You want to discourage anything that's inappropriate and make sure you tie the learning into maintaining that esteem and status that they've attained up to this point. So again, we're just rehashing what we've already said before. It's really important for you to maintain the esteem and status of these students as they're moving through the program. I've seen students who have gotten all the way through a paramedic program. They're getting ready to go to National Registry and test. And I've seen preceptors who have worked with them on the truck, and they have engaged them and they've hammered them so hard that they have completely destroyed their esteem and status. And what may have been a perfectly good field preceptor or field provider is now they walked away. They walked away. They had finished the entire program. They quit the field entirely because of one encounter with a bad preceptor, and it was enough to knock their self-esteem. Now, I know that apparently that self-esteem must have been shaky, but now we're looking at the safety and security. And what did they do? They walked away in order to maintain that safety and security balance. So just remember, they're looking to you as a mentor, and your verbal cues are going to mean a lot more to them. So with the drivers, this is the final little thing. There's several different types of drivers out there. Be perfect driver, the please me, hurry up, try harder, and be strong. So we're going to look at each one of those. So you have the be perfect driver, and these are the new students who are going to make mistakes. We know that, but we need to remind them that they are human and that they're no less of a person or a student if they make that error. If they're going to make a mistake, we want them to make it in the precepting arena where you can kind of help guide and navigate them and prevent damage and prevent patient error, patient care mistakes. So remind them it's okay. We're going to help you walk through it, and we're going to make you better. So the Be Perfect driver, these are the new students that are really anxious. I've got the good picture here where the guy is showing that he's got the 99.8 and he's really stressed out because he's 0.2 of a point away from making a perfect score, and that has really upset him. And that's that Be Perfect driver. You got to be perfect. We've got to be perfect at this. And those students do have to be reminded that they are human and it's okay to make a mistake. We'd rather them make it in the classroom, in the lab, last case scenarios, you guys out in the field, and that we want them to make it there where they've got someone who is watching them and being very careful about those live patient encounters, and that the patients aren't suffering as the result of the student. So we want them to be able to feel that they are just as strong and it's okay. They're not less of a human. There's the please me driver. These are the individuals that have this underlying need or the drive to help someone in order to make themselves feel good. And because we have that mentality, those types of people that have the please me driver, we want to encourage those students to take time off. Okay, great. I see that you're like knocking out all these hours and you're doing all this stuff and you're doing all this other extra stuff. And maybe you need to take a break and pull back, because that can burn a person out very quickly. There is the person that has the hurry up driver. These are the mass procrastinators, as I've got here in the picture. The person only feels good personally when they're placed under pressure. And as preceptors, we want to encourage these students not to procrastinate and not to set unrealistic deadlines. Those individuals are out there. You have to remind them, you know, especially in the field of emergency services, you know, we are under our own pressures and deadlines. We don't need to add to it by being procrastinators. So make sure you try to encourage them not to procrastinate. In class, you know, those are the ones that we're kicking in the booty to get them out there to do their ride time, and they want to put it off. Well, I'm not going to go this month. I'll just do twice as many next month. Well, those numbers start adding up and this becomes really bad. You know, remind them of you don't want to engage them where you're trying to solve their problems for them, but ask them more about what are the consequences, what's going to happen if you end up putting this off till next month, you know, what's going to end up occurring, and make them really take account for what their actions can result in. So try to get them to not be the hurry up driver and procrastinate. Now the try harder driver, oh, I wish I could put student pictures up with this, because I've got pictures of students that were like this in my career. But these are the try harder. They strive to please everyone else or make everyone like them. They're the ones that please like me. I'm going to do everything. And the problem is that those are the ones that slip into acting and behaving like the negative Nancys in the world, and they're doing it just because they want to fit in. So they may be excited about learning the material, but only around certain people that are also excited. And they maybe become negative if they're around people that are really negative. So we want to address the student. If they make a mistake, we want to address it. You don't have to like someone to be a good preceptor. That's another little side point I want to point out here. So first and foremost, if the student makes a mistake, go ahead and address it with them, but make sure that you validate them, that you're giving them that value. We talked about those strokes. We want to give them that conditional response and give them a positive conditional response. But you don't have to like someone to be a good preceptor. I've seen it time and time again. There are students that come through the programs. You don't necessarily like them, but you have to be able to work with them. It's the same on the truck. We have those people that we work with that we're not real fond of, but you still have to make it work for the encounter. And you can do this too. But watch those students. They are the ones that are going to push. They're the ones that will like to mirror those individuals, because they're trying desperately to fit in. And if they make a mistake, those are the ones that typically catastrophize it. And so you want to make sure that you approach it in a very positive way. You want to identify, and you don't want them to continue with the bad whatever, but you want to be able to identify it, give them the positives, identify the negatives, and make them work through that, and remind them that they're still good in your book. So you have the be strong driver. This is the person that hides their emotions from other people. While we don't want students to wear their heart on their sleeve, sorry, I just found my typo there. Wow, that's great. Make sure they realize it is okay to let others know how he or she is feeling, because we know that be strong driver can wreck a person's drive to be in the field of emergency services altogether. We want to make sure that we provide them with the confidence and the ability to be able to move forward in their career, and that means that they do have to open up and let others know if they're having a hard time. So make sure they realize it's okay to let others know how they feel. Now we're going to look at some behavioral issues that are commonplace in education. Now these will transcribe into the field as those students move toward you. You have the proverbial vacationer. This is someone that does not complete their tasks on time. These are the ones that arrive late and leave early. You want to remind them of their responsibilities and the gravity of the job well done. The other thing that I want you to know too is don't tolerate the arriving late and leaving early. Do not tolerate it. Evaluate them properly with that, because we can correct these behavioral issues if you address them. Don't feel like you have to make them like you as the preceptor. Remember, they go into the like me mode. Go ahead and address those. Don't let them get by with that. Now the prisoner, this is the student that is resistant to everything. He feels like he is serving time. He doesn't want to be here. I have had these students before. They get them involved, make them feel as though they are contributing, and not only will they benefit, but others will benefit from their participation as well. And I've used this mentality in classes with students that feel like they're serving time, like they're just stuck there. So these are the people that maybe they don't want to take a good example is if we had someone that was taking a CPR class and they don't want to take the CPR class because they think it's a complete waste of their time. They took it 10 years ago. Why do I have to do this again? My employer's making me come out and take this class. This is the last thing I want to do on a Saturday. I could be out fishing. Those prisoners, if you find things for them to be in charge of or make them do, where they feel like they're contributing and helping other people, you know, oh, that's great. You took this 10 years ago. Let's talk about that. What did you see back then? Well, this is what's new now. Well, maybe we need to get up here. You've done CPR before. Let's see how your compressions are. Let's see if we can get this to help these other students. So when you get those prisoners involved, it kind of changes their mentality. And you can do that in the field as a preceptor as well. Now, the adventurer, this is someone who is learning as an adventurer. They arrive early, they stay late, they ask a lot of questions. I cannot tell you how many times this person comes through. But you can channel their excitement and you can raise your own. So don't poo-poo them. Find a way to kind of get that contagious excitement to yourself. And you may have to tone them down. These are the ones that you know, they're usually engaged. They're highly engaged in the field with you as a preceptor, and they're wanting to be there. You know, they're on your skirt tails. They're with you all the time. But you may have to remind them to tone it down if the questions are being brought up at the wrong time. So this is really kind of the good student that we want to see, the adventurer, but just understand that they can be very taxing to you as a preceptor, and sometimes you have to kind of rein them in a little bit. Now the V.I.P, this is very, very similar to the one that feels like they're the prisoner. And because they are the V.I.P, they may have that bad attitude toward training because they already know it all. This is above, or this is beneath me, excuse me. So reverse their V.I.P attitudes. Have them explain how the technique best applies to real life. Engage them in it. Well, you think that we did a bad job? Tell me what we could have done different. And when you ask them that after the call, you know, you can engage them in a conversation. You may not be able to change their mind, but at least you're going to make that V.I.P feel like they're a part of the team, and we can build confidence in the right way in these individuals to where they can accept and receive and give information, and you have a good transfer of learning. Now you got the worrier. And I think we all have that one person that pops into our mind that's the worrier. This is the person that's in a near panic state all of the time. They ask for constant clarification. They will arrive early, stay late. They typically, it's a low self-image that drives this mentality, but also it may, well, it's not an also thing. It really ties in with the low self-image because they're gonna seek out attention to make themselves feel more confident. So understand that the worrier can be so extreme that they're actually looking for attention to kind of feed them through. So you want to give them positive feedback, allay their fears, and if you find that that's a person that seems to be feeding off of the attention that they receive, maybe you need to reroute those individuals when you encounter them. You know, give them positive feedback, but say, you know, we've already talked to you. You did this before. There's no reason for us to be here again. You did fantastic doing this skill yesterday. Stop worrying about it. Let's move on. Let's keep moving. Now you have the challenger. This is also very similar to the V.I.P. They love a challenge. They believe that they already know everything, and they're going to seek out information different from what you convey to try to challenge or undermine you as the preceptor. These are the ones that are infamous for Googling their responses or trying to find more information so that they can engage you. But if it's not appropriate, if they do it in the field and you're with a patient, advise them that you'll address their concerns at a more appropriate time if it's not, you know, when it should be. And if they're correct, acknowledge it. Say yeah, and if they're partially correct, make sure you acknowledge, but also correct them where it's necessary. Don't let them get by with it, because then they're going to try to gain ground over you, and you will lose that dynamic that you need to have in order to make them a good quality provider at the end of the day. And those are the ones that are challenging. I'm not going to argue with that. I've had those students in class before. They literally stood up and folded their arms and said, well, I read, and they found this one obscure little point in the textbook, and they said, well, I had to remove it. And I'm like, yes, that is true. You are correct. And you can add to it at the end. When you engage them in the right way and meet them here, then usually you can kind of stop or control or navigate that challenging behavior, and they'll eventually start to subside that. Now, we're going to do all of this through communication strategies, and we've kind of highlighted the important points here for this. So there's 3 ego states. One is the parent, the other is the adult, and then you have the child. Now, the parent is the voice of authority, whereas the adult works in the here and now. This is the rational, autonomous state of mind. And then if we act like a child, it's typically because our emotional response has been triggered, and this is typically grounded on your childhood experiences. So however your childhood was, that's how you'll respond in that ego state. So when we are working with individuals, we have to remember that we're going to approach them based on one of these 3 ego states. So typically when we encounter alterations in the ego is during the corrective training part, or during that post-call critique, when you're sitting down with them and you're trying to discuss what they did well and what they didn't do well. And the child ego kind of can creep into the picture with these students because of things that happened in their past. So I'm going to explain that here in a second. But what I want you to realize is where you need to be is either the parent or the adult mentality. And sometimes you can reflect and adjust this based on how that person responds or reacts. And remember, every person is different, so you're going to kind of have to feel out what works and what doesn't work in terms of trying to get through to that mindset. Because remember, as children, we can dig our heels in and we can sulk and create problems. But remember, what ends up happening is as adults, if we're faced with difficult situations, that actually can mentally or psychologically transport us back to our childhood feelings of frustration, anger or rejection, and you can actually end up replaying these repressed emotions. So even though you've become an adult, those feelings of helplessness, anger, and disappointment are still creeping in the back, and you still experience those situations, and how you interact with them is where you see these child egos come out. So here's a good thought process. Think about a time when you were a child and your parents scolded you. If that ever happened and you went and sulked for hours because you didn't have permission to express your anger at them, or would you shout back at them? However you reacted to your parents, that is what will come out in these child ego states as an adult. Unfortunately, we will regress right back into that mentality. So you'll have those students that maybe you had to correct them, and now they're going to sulk for an hour. There's ways to work around that. You may have to re-engage them and get them focused back on the excite, entice, and empower part of it. So just kind of keep an open mind on how you want to address that child state of mind when it comes up. And whatever you do as a preceptor, you should never lower yourself into that child's ego state of mind. You should maintain that higher road as the parent or adult ego. So we listen, we either ignore, maybe we pretend to listen, or we're selectively listening, or we're actively listening. And then there's another thing called empathetic listening. And I want you to know that we need to look as preceptors at actively listening to these students and being empathetic. Remember, there was a time when you were in that student's position and you were going through the same struggles or very similar struggles that they're going through. As preceptors, when we encounter students that are experiencing a problem, or we can tell that they're not as engaged as they should be, or maybe something's a little off with them, we need to start engaging that active listening skill. We want to try to discover the root of the problem. Even if they're having trouble with a certain skill set, actively listen to them, hear what they're telling you. You may be able to identify where the problem started. And if it's something that took place in the classroom, I really want you to tell me, because we need to fix that so that other students don't experience that. And we're always open to that kind of engagement. So when you're doing active listening with this student, you want to kind of make sure that your body language reflects the active listening. So you want to have your arms and legs open. You want to have a direct eye contact. You want to smile, lean in, kind of nod. Repeat some of the stuff back to that person and see if there's an engagement, if you understand what they're asking. Sitting back with your arms folded, your legs crossed, and you're looking at them like whatever, or looking at your phone or your smartwatch or whatever, and be very aware of that. There are older students that come through classes. They're used to the old mentality of the only thing a watch was used for was for time. And the idea of someone looking at you and looking at their watch means that they're getting bored and they got other things they need to do. So you walk out of that active listening mindset in their eyes, and you're not interested. But we also have a lot of information that comes across our watches now, and we have our cell phones. If that person's talking to you, you need to actively listen to what they're saying. Be empathetic, and we're going to look at empathetic listening here in a second. This involves all the senses. So 7 to 10% of empathetic listening is words. How the words are being said rates at 30 to 38%. 55 to 60 means we're incorporating body language into that. So when we're trying to be an empathetic listener, we are looking at that student's verbal and nonverbal cues to kind of guide us, and hopefully we can identify some experiences in that active listening. We're listening to them, and we can identify experiences that may be contributing to the emotions that you're seeing, and then we're going to respond back to let them know that we understand what they're going through. So that can be as simple as, you told me that you had trouble with class yesterday, so you really encountered some problems yesterday then. And so by just repeating back, that lets them know that you understand that a transfer of knowledge has occurred, a transfer of information has happened. Now, there are things that can impact how well we listen. So we're going to look at noise. Noise is defined as anything that hampers communication. This can be physical or even psychological. So we've all been on those calls where you're trying to cut a car open. You've got the patient inside and you're trying to hold C-spine because the little skinny person has been thrown in there and they're holding C-spine with that patient. And communication can be hampered just by all the noises of the equipment going on. That's a good example of that. Of course, in the ideal world, we would be able to block all that noise out and just be able to communicate, but unfortunately that doesn't happen in the real world. So remember that is a physical noise that we can't do anything about. Now, the psychological noise that can hamper communication, a good example of this would be, maybe that student is at home and they're going through a rough time with their family. Maybe they're husband and wife and they're talking about divorce. Then they come into the field to do their internship and they're with you, and maybe you're trying to engage them and talk to them about a patient, post-call critique, and you're talking to them, but they're really not hearing you. And it's because they're focused in their mind, they're still focused on their problems at home, and that psychological noise of dealing with the emotions and the mental processes of where am I going to be? How am I going to financially manage my life? You know, if I end up getting divorced, all of that psychological noise can actually hamper the communication that you're having with them. And that's where, you know, we can take an empathetic look or listening to that person, that empathetic ear, and say, you know, what's going on? Why are we having what's got you distracted? Because you've noticed that there's some verbal cues or nonverbal cues that are going on. Maybe they're just seeming like they're distracted, and then you start noticing things, and then they tell you, oh, well, you know, I'm dealing with this divorce at home. You know, you can find out that information, talk to them, and start to remove that noise so that they can focus on the condition at hand. Now, there are other ways psychological noise can impact what's going on. So it could be that the psychological noise is an attack on one's character or self, because once that happens, their mind is going to go directly to that attack, and they're going to focus on that. Many people, like most people, will sit and revolve that on that little spinning hamster wheel, and they'll keep thinking about it. So an attack on one's character or self can be an example of psychological noise, and we don't want to cause that. So there's times when we're field precepting and we're working with these students and we try to engage them, and we want to make sure that when we approach them for the corrective measures, if they've done something wrong, that we instill this confidence in them that this is not an attack on their character or self. But I've seen things kind of fall apart pretty quickly if the preceptor uses the wrong type of language when they're interacting with their student, and then the student takes it as an attack on character and self, and then that encounter is completely ruined for that day because now they're focused entirely on that psychological noise. It could be that noise is the result of the stress of an incident. Maybe they're using controlling behaviors like using elaborate arguments to try to wear you down, refusing to talk, so you can see that sulking or the posturing that says that they're, I'm going to pout, the pouty lip. They may try to control someone else's reality. Well, that's not what you saw. Last time I checked, you ain't looking at my eyeballs, so how is that? Control by putting others down, and this is through assigning status and putting other people down. Now, when we manage our students, we want to use some good leadership and counseling techniques to enhance the learning transfer. We really want that, the big fancy educational term is metacognition. So we want to make sure that we try to get them into the problem solving, the critical thinking skills, and we can do this with good leadership and counseling techniques. Now, there's three main leadership types or leadership styles that we're going to talk about today. The first is the authoritarian, second is democratic, and finally the hands-off leadership style. So the authoritarian style of leadership is really good when you're in a time-sensitive situation such as a cardiac arrest and everybody's got certain jobs and tasks to do. So the authoritarian is a really good place to use that when there's time-sensitive stuff going on. The problem with the authoritarian style is it's very stressful. It's a very high-key approach, and there's no room for personal growth. And remember, that's what we're trying to lead to in the long run, is that person needs to grow and become confident in themselves. So it's good to use, but understand that it's only good in certain situations. Now, the democratic leadership style, this is where you're inviting participation. Again, I found another typo, and it does give room for growth. Now, the issue with the democratic leadership style is that you can get bogged down in committee, so to speak. So decision making can get bogged down if you're in a time crunch. So sometimes the decision making, you have to balance between the democratic and the authoritarian, particularly if you're dealing directly in a patient encounter. That's where sometimes you have to balance that out and remember that time is important for those patients. Now, the hands-off leadership style Hopefully, once they've reached you, particularly our paramedic students. Now, this won't work so good for our EMT students because they do need some hand holding. We need to build their confidence. They are starting from the very bottom of the barrel, and we've got to kind of engage them so that they can feel like they're part of a team and start to build and cultivate that self-esteem. But in the students that are taking paramedic course, usually the hands-off leadership style can be utilized in the capstone field environment once you've gained confidence in their ability to function. So these are the hands-off leadership style is really great for someone who is a self-starter. We want those paramedic students, by the time they get to the capstone, to become confident and be able to be self-starters. But sometimes it may require you as the preceptor to run with them and engage them in some different calls to make sure that they can handle that type of leadership style and let them figure this stuff out. The problem with this, and I'm going to take my face out of the picture here so you can see the whole thing, but the hands-off leadership style can lead to low achievement and productivity if it's not tampered with the other two types of styles. So just so you understand, when you're working in that leadership style, I really think blending and knowing when to engage each one of those categories during your time with these students is really crucial to being that awesome preceptor that I know you can be. So you just have to figure out when it's best to use each of the three different styles. There are times as a preceptor where you're going to have to counsel that student, and it could be something as simple as counseling them on their activities in the precepting arena, or it could be something where the student has that psychological noise and you kind of have to route them and get that psychological noise addressed before they'll actually hear you as a preceptor and be able to engage in the encounters. So there are some counseling do's and there are some counseling don'ts. So we want to go over these, and I'm going to go ahead and move my face out of the picture. So we want you to be courteous. We want you to pay attention to that student. And remember, above all else, you need to be patient and show sincerity. Promise that person confidentiality. The worst thing you can do to impact that person's development is going to be to go out and tell someone else that's not involved with that student about something that was said in confidentiality. So when you break that trust, you break that bond and that ability to really engage that person. So promise confidentiality and keep it. You know, if you need to bring something, bring it to me or bring it to one of the instructors. Don't go out and talk to other people that are not part of that direct student's line of engagement, okay? Let the student set the pace. They're going to ask questions. Let them ask questions for clarification. You know, you ask questions for clarification. That way, when you ask clarification, that shows that you're actively listening. Try to engage that student to pinpoint the problem and ask them, is this the issue? And then get his or her acceptance on a resolution. Remember, you're not taking on their psychological problems, and you're not going to try to engage them, but you do want to get them to accept some sort of resolution so you can move forward. And then, of course, you want to follow up with them later. Now, on counseling don'ts, you don't want to take on their burden. Offer suggestions for resolution. You don't want to give advice. You don't want to offer opinions or make judgments. You really need to ask them, what do you think, instead of offering suggestions for a resolution. One of the best key phrases, and I actually got this in college when I was a resident advisor, but ask them, what do you think would work? What will work? What are your options? What kind of options do you have? And if they give out 3 different options, then ask them, of those 3 options, what would be the end result? What would be the result of taking this particular option? What are the good and the bad of taking this option? Then ask them about option number 2. What's the good and bad of taking option number 2? When they get to number 3, what's the good and bad of taking option 3? And if they figure out what's good and bad, then you then you're able to say, you know, of those three, which one do you think is going to be beneficial to you based on being able to weigh out the pros and cons of each? What's the best option? So don't offer suggestions, but kind of route them to get them to focus their attention and get through that process. When you're critiquing your students, because there are going to be times when you're going to encounter a patient encounter, for example, and you're going to see how a student handles that patient encounter, and you're going to have to critique them. You're going to have to do that follow-up, that post-call critique. Remember that critiquing is defined as a controlled criticism, and it is a systematic approach to spotting a weakness or a flaw or an error or a mistake. So you're going to identify the problem, determine what needs to be done to resolve it, and make the student list possible resolution. So we've moved past the counseling point. We're actually putting that same concept I just talked about into play with the critique. So make the student list the possible resolutions and eliminate those that are not viable. Decide on the course of action, make them implement it, and then of course we want to evaluate the effectiveness of the plan and reinforce the positive. I think when you're critiquing, it's important to start with the positive, give them the negative, have them work through and decide on a course of action, and then tell them how, you know, not tell them how, but walk them through or kind of make them work on that implementation part, and then evaluate and reinforce the positive. So you may start with a positive, you may be in the middle with the negative, and then when you're ending the discussion or the critique, you want to reinforce the positives and evaluate the effectiveness of the plan. Friendliness. Friendliness is defined as a warm and sympathetic attitude that can be shared with everyone. Friendships and the preceptor are a problem because sometimes people forget. They hope that people will do things as long as they feel like they can get by with it. If they think they won't get caught, they're going to go ahead and try. But if they think they're going to get called out on the floor or called out on the carpet, then they're not as likely to engage that. But when it comes to friendships, and you've seen these people, you've worked with them in the field as colleagues, and now they're going through class and they're coming to you because they're the student and they're looking at you as the preceptor, and then they want to hit the, well, you're my buddy thing. Friendship and the preceptor, this can be a huge problem, and it can affect your friendship. So make sure that they know up front that you're going to draw the line. This is we are preceptor right now. I'm your buddy outside of here, but we don't want to gray the lines one direction or another, and that you're there to perform a special function, and that there's absolutely nothing personal, and you don't want it to, you know, sway the friendship outside, but you have a job to do, and that you're there for that. So remember, you can be friendliness. This is a warm and sympathetic attitude that can be shared with everyone, versus a friendship, which, you know, being in the precepting arena with these individuals that you've worked with for maybe a couple years can be very unsettling if they start feeling like they're taking things for granted. So the best way to approach that is right at the front. If they think that they're going to get called to the carpet, they're less likely to do it. So be up front, draw the line with them at the front, and in that way they're not going to try to take advantage of the friendship as you go. So if you have to do a 1-minute reprimand, if you have to do a reprimand, or you have to talk to someone about something that was negative about the way they handled patient encounter, for example, remember, we want to start with the positive, have the negative in the middle, and end with a positive. So praise what you can. Be specific on what they did wrong. Do not. Women seem to be really talented at this. I can say that too, because I have a husband, and I can go, huh, and I can ignore him and be mean, and then I expect him to figure out what I'm talking about. Be very specific. Don't pull that mentality of, well, I'm going to like fuzz this over and make it sound kind of frou-frou-y, and I'm not going to give you really what the real problem is. I'm going to kind of skirt around it because I don't want to be in that uncomfortable situation. Remember, you are a preceptor and you're there to do a job. So you need to praise what you can, be very specific on what they did wrong, and make sure you give them time to think. They have to process what you've said. You can't just ramble on and then get at the end, because they're going to sit and that's going to become psychological noise. So give them a minute to think, and then remind them of their value. Remember, it's all about excite, entice, and we want to build that self-esteem and the confidence, and we want to give them a good sure footing for when they're out in the field on their own. So remind them of their value and reaffirm you think well of them, just not of the particular situation or whatever that particular incident was that you feel you need to kind of correct any behavioral issues you see. So when it comes to motivating the adult learner, we're going to look at that and we'll be done for today. So motivating the adult learner, there's 6 factors that go into motivating adults. 1, social relationships are huge. External expectations, social welfare, personal advancement, escape or stimulation. Maybe they're looking for something to do and they decide to take paramedic class. Cognitive interest. So those are 6 factors that motivate adults. And if you can play to any of those motivators, then you're going to have them in your pocket and you're going to be able to keep them excited, enticed, and engaged and empowered for the time that they're with you on the truck. What else can you do? You can develop and reinforce a positive self-image. Tell them to try and alleviate the anxiety. You want to make it fun. Again, we're about excite and entice. We want to set and communicate high expectations. We don't want them to set for mediocre. We want them to be above the standard. And confidence in yourself as the preceptor is really going to sell that. If you don't have confidence in yourself, the student won't have confidence in you either. So make the patient encounters, make the entire call, make the entire event, even when it's on the downtime, when you're not turning a wheel on the truck, you want to make it interactive. Talk to that person, ask them what they're doing in class right now. Kind of learn. What do you think is hard right now? What are you struggling with? Try to help engage them if you can. And if you don't have the best answer, maybe that's an area that you're not confident in, tell them how they can find some help for it. Those are ways you can motivate the adult learner, but you can adjust a person's mentality and their approach to education if you know how to motivate them. And if you focus on one of those 6 factors that motivate adults and you blend that into your way to deal with them, you can actually motivate them to be very productive and become excellent students, and further train them to take our place when we get old. So here we go, motivating the adult learner. I hope you have gotten some good information out of this. You know, as a preceptor, you wear a number of hats. You're not only an instructor at times when they have questions, you're going to facilitate the education, you're facilitating the environment. You want them to learn and become engaged. You're going to coach them along. You're going to be a cheerleader. You're going to be father, mom. You may have to be a counselor at sometimes. But this means your focus is on the needs of each student. So we're going to achieve the long-term goal of providing our community with confident and competent EMS providers. Again, this program will not succeed. It doesn't matter how much I teach them if you aren't there to help us. So I really appreciate all your effort today in listening to me and getting through this presentation, and I look forward to working with you with our students. Please, my door is always open if you have any issues with anyone, any of the students, or if you just have questions about how to get through, you know, my door is there. My door is open. Come see me anytime. Thank you again for all of the work you put in, because we couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.